The eyes are, we say, the windows of the soul. We see somebody's soul in their eyes, and in portraiture too, there is a sense of contact with the soul, and we can't quite get away, can we, from this idea, I don't see why we should, because it's very deep in us, that something comes out of the eyes, not just goes into it. It's present in almost every culture and in every language. What I quite like is the Hasidic idea of soul, in which there are two distinct souls. They remind me somewhat of a couple of hemispheres I once described. One is the animal soul, which is all about self-preservation and self-enhancement, and the other is the divine soul, which is driven by the desire to reconnect with its source. And our lives are the story of the interplay of these two souls. They're not side by side, by the way, but they're sort of nested, so that the divine soul is inside the animal soul, which is inside the body. The soul is not the same as the body, but it's not opposed to it either. We need to go to people like Goethe and Blake to be able to understand that opposites don't have to eliminate one another. In particular, I like very much Goethe's idea that we find the infinite not by turning our backs on the finite, but through the finite. We find the general not by turning our backs on the particular, but through the particular, and that these are false dichotomies. In fact, in the Hasidic tradition, the nature of Sephirah, which is essentially the created world, is the synthesis of everything and its opposite. For if they didn't possess the power of synthesis, there would be no energy in anything. This is rather like the idea in Heraclitus of harmonia, two poles that are held in tension and out of which the richness of existence occurs. So somehow it's something there that is in the world but not in the world, that is in contact with something other but is also immanent here in the world. And I like that because the idea of creation is to create relationship. And so this otherness needs to be accessible. The divine needs to be both transcendent and immanent at the same time. I come back to that phrase in Iris Murdoch, a light that shows the world, this world, as it really is. The soul is what makes the world authentic. It's what is really in touch with experience. She also says it's terribly distant, farther than any star. We're sort of stretched out. So it has that element of otherness, but it's brought together. And so it's indefinable, but not remote. In Teilhard de Chardin's way of thinking, we might say we are steeped in soul. He has this wonderful expression, by means of all created things without exception, the divine assails us, penetrates us, and molds us. We imagine it as distant and inaccessible, whereas in fact we live steeped in its burning layers. So how do we contact this thing that is other? Well, we need to make an effort. We need to put ourselves in the disposition to understand it. We're not going to understand it at all if we stand there resistant to the idea and waiting for it to sort of turn up as something credible to us. And I'm reminded here of a joke which a Jewish friend told me about a rabbi who's very poor but very spiritual. And his life would be very much more comfortable if he had some money. And he prays to God, please let me win the lottery. And his prayer never seems to be answered. One day he's at prayer, and God says to him, look, Samuel, meet me halfway, buy a ticket. And I sort of feel there's a deep spiritual truth in that we only get there if we are prepared to buy a ticket. As so often, we can say what it isn't. And Hillman, in a work called Suicide and the Soul, says, the soul is a deliberately ambiguous concept, resisting all definition in the same manner as do all ultimate symbols, which provide the root metaphors for the systems of human thought. Mind, matter, nature, gravity, time, energy, and God all fall into this category. So spirituality is often about not knowing, because knowing means you've got it wrong. It can't be defined. It's not a concept. It's a symbol, not wholly of our making. Rabindranath Tagore talks about the ways in which one can understand. The small wisdom is like water in a glass, clear, transparent, pure. The great wisdom is like the water in the sea, dark, mysterious, impenetrable. So as Jung says, there may be a danger of wanting to understand the meaning, and by doing so, overvaluing the content, which is subjected to a sort of intellectual analysis and interpretation, so that the essentially symbolic character can no longer do its work. And what goes missing is meaning and value for the subject. So there's a sort of danger in my terms of the left hemisphere having to collapse too quickly into something familiar. What is it precisely? Leaving therefore no place for the intuited and the implicit, through which all great ideas in art, in religion, and in our lives are communicated.